There's no question but that the Republican Party today is in the shadow of Donald Trump. He is the leader of the greatest portion of the Republican Party. It's a populist, I believe, demagogue portion of the party. Look, I represent a small wing of the party, if you will. I call it the wise wing of the Republican Party.
Welcome back to America Decides. That was Utah Republican Senator Mitt Romney yesterday describing the Trump base of the Republican Party. Romney also made it official that he will not seek a second term in the Senate. McKay Coppins, in an excerpt in The Atlantic of his forthcoming book about the senator, wrote, quote, "Romney's isolation in Washington didn't surprise me. In less than a decade, he'd gone from Republican standard-bearer and presidential nominee to party pariah thanks to a series of public clashes with Trump." Kristian Ramos and Kevin Madden join us now. Kristian is a Democratic strategist and senior advisor at Way to Win. And Kevin is a senior partner at the Penta Group and served as a senior advisor and spokesman to Mitt Romney's 2012 and 2008 presidential campaigns. Thank you both so much for being with us
Glad
today.
to be here. Thanks.
Kevin, I want to read you a little more from Coppins' book excerpt and get your reaction. He says, quote, "A very large portion of my party," Romney told me one day, "really doesn't believe in the Constitution." And he'd realized this only recently. So I wonder if you think that had a part to play in his decision to leave.
Yeah, I think it had a tremendous impact on him. And I think it probably grew harder and harder for him to rationalize and deal with internally over time as he saw more and more of it as he was in the Senate. There just is this canyon between what people say publicly about Donald Trump and and also I think with the importance that of confronting Donald Trump, I think inside the party, and then what they say publicly and what they do publicly and how they lead fights or communicate the type of important details that maybe some of their constituents or party members or party leaders need to know. So I think that canyon increasingly remains tough to right now to bridge. And that's why I think in all the public remarks that he's made since his announcement, he's sort of spoken to that. And I think the thing that I always remembered about Romney and what made it really easy to work for him is, you go through these 18-hour days, really tough campaigns. But when you're working for somebody who's an optimist and has a really good sense of the chart forward, it becomes a very incentivizing thing. And I think it's become harder and harder as you work through the Senate and he's dealt with some of the folks internally in the party for him to be optimistic about it. I still think he's an optimist. I still think he has a hopeful view of where the party can go and where the country can go. But that ultimately, if we're going to manifest some of that, it has to return to a sort of new generation of leaders. And that was, I think, the crux of what he was saying yesterday.
Sorry, go ahead. You're going to chime in?
No, I was just, first, we're not going to see the likes of Mitt Romney in the Republican Party, I think, ever again or for a long time. And the reason I laughed or smirked is because the next generation of the Republican Party is MAGA. It's MAGA. And I think MAGA is everything that Mitt Romney hates about the current Republican movement. And so it's tough, right? He has to be looking at the writing on the wall with Mitch McConnell and his health and what's going on in the Senate and what happens when Mitch McConnell goes. Mitch McConnell was another outspoken critic of the president. When I talk to folks on the Hill and they talk to me about the dynamic there with McConnell leaving, Mitch McConnell was the guy who held the line against the MAGA extremism. And so people like Mitt Romney, of course, what am I going to do now?
And Democrats are pointing to MAGA as what's fueling the impeachment inquiry on Capitol Hill, at least in part.
Sure.
So
yes.
I wonder, now that it is an inquiry, does that make it more difficult to defend against or to dismiss, as many Democrats were doing?
This is what I'll say. Kevin McCarthy is trying to hold on to his speaker's gavel. Doing impeachment plus the budget negotiations, he is just trying to keep the right flank of his caucus, which is large, in check. And he is doing anything that he can to give them little pieces of this and that to keep them from voting him out as speaker. And that's really all this is.
Do you agree with that, Kevin?
Well, I think that's an important part of it. I think the danger in that is when you have something as weighty of a constitutional process like impeachment, and you get pressured into it, it becomes very impossible to manage. And if you think about trying to manage an impeachment inquiry at the same time where, what are we, 17 days away from a potential budget showdown where all of your attention should be applied there, the problems start to pile up. And I think the strategies you're going to need to really manage this conference, which is a very volatile conference, and there are some appetites in there about impeaching Trump that are sort of rabid. Mm-hmm. It becomes really increasingly problematic, and it increasingly becomes problematic when you start to look at the electoral politics of this, because if you look at the folks that make or break national elections, who's going to control the House, who's going to control the Senate, who's going to win the presidency, those suburban swing voters, they do not like chaos. They do not like this type of instability. Right. So while a lot of folks will communicate that to McCarthy, we have to do this if we're going to win the majority back, there's probably a greater likelihood that it could potentially cost them.
Well, of course, at the center of the inquiry is Hunter Biden, and I have to ask you about today's big development because he was indicted on that gun charge. Kristian, is this going to make it harder for President Biden because he sort of, we know that talking about his family is his Achilles heel. He wants to talk about his family. He wants to defend his family. This is hard.
Of course it's hard. And you know what? Joe Biden is a great father, and he loves his son. And of course, you're right. He's a human being, and this is tough. I'll say two things here. One, we got a record of job creation. We got a small business creation. We've done a lot of incredible things in the economy. And as long as we're talking about that, we're good. And the rest of this stuff, it's got to play out in the court system, and people are going to have to figure that out. But at this point, look, the president is focused on the job at hand, on an economic recovery that is working for everybody.
And we have to go, but Kevin, quickly, is that going to be enough to overcome the impeachment inquiry and Hunter Biden charges?
No, because the court of law, where this might be fought out of the court of an impeachment process and the court of public opinion, they tend to intersect here. In the court of public opinion, one of the things I worry about if I was a Democrat is at every step of the way, the Hunter Biden inquiries have gotten more and more embarrassing for the White House, and more headlines come out that are negative. So that would be a problem I'd have to worry about if I were a Democrat.
We will be watching. Thank you both so much for your time.
Great to be with you.